Good morning. Welcome to Sacred Enzyme. I'm Stacy. I hope you're doing well today. I am so sorry that I have not had time to make any content. I have been so busy, but if you're following the other channel, I've been trickling a little bit down as it's been coming along. I've been doing a lot of work out here in this greenhouse trying to get the seed bank going. And so I've had a few setbacks, but I'm not going to let it keep me from moving forward. So today I've got a lot of repair work to do out there. I apologize for not doing the live the other night. We had a storm that just blew through here and literally ripped half of my greenhouse out of the ground. And I'm out there in the middle of the pouring rain, digging with my hands, trying to keep the whole thing from blowing away. So I'll tell you what, and yesterday and today I've been out there trying to fix things because all the stuff that I had running up came apart and my tower came down and I lost a bunch of seedlings. So I'm not going to dwell on it. We're just going to move forward. So in the meantime, I've been listening to a lot of audio books, and I'm not a big sleeper, so I'm up a lot in the middle of the night. So I've come across quite a few things that have got my gears going. So I want to go over these audiobooks that I've been listening to because they're pretty interesting. It all ties in together with the information that we've been sharing on the channel. I've been talking about the North Pole and Greenland for a long time now. And if you've been following the channel, you know that now all this stuff is starting to come into the mainstream about Greenland and about the North Pole and about this being island of Jesus up at the North Pole, and us being in Satan's little season, and it's the end of Satan's season. So I've been doing a lot of reading, guys, so we've got some interesting stuff. So let's just dive right in. So the first thing I want to do is a breakdown, and I just wrote notes as in my phone as I'm listening to these books and reading these books. So it's kind of just written as notes. So we're just going to go through it like that. So the first book that I want to talk about is Nordic Aliens and the Fairies of Ireland Through the Wormhole, the Tuatha Dé Danann and Celtic Irish Druids by Lars Bergen and Sharon Delarose. They claim from their research that the Nordics were the Celtic Druids and the Tuatha Dé Danann. Sharon also stated that they tied to the Scottish groups, to Scandinavia, and Greeks through their deities, okay? They possessed advanced technology, and that they had a link to Hyperborea. On the YouTube channel Secret Origins, they talk about the Nordic beings in more detail by an account from 1952 by George Adamski. George Adamski ran into some of these Nordic beings in the Mojave Desert, and this being was communicating with him that they came from Venus and that they were warning humanity about the danger of nuclear weapons. This is 1952. Some others, hypothesize that the Nordics are also tied to the Pleiades star cluster, Aldebaran, right? And then Jesus is also tied to Aldebaran, guys. Okay, this is where I'm alluding to. When we get to the end, I'll tie it all together. We've also talked in past episodes about the Gospel of Thomas, that Jesus was a twin, guys. Jesus was a twin. And also there's some ties to Zeta Reticuli with the Nordics. So it just basically goes to show you that these Nordic beings are all throughout the solar system and other galaxies, just like the other different shades of beings that are here on Earth, because they've all went through cycles on their planets, right? And they've found their planet inhabitable. They had to find another place to go, or they found that the end of the cycle of their planet was coming up and that they had to find another place to go. Just like all of this space exploration that's been happening here on Earth all this time, right? It's because they've been trying to find another place to go, because they know that we're coming to the end of this cycle on Earth. And there are beings here that are not going to evolve outside of this system. And the planet is ascending because it's time to come out of the season of Satan and go back into the Christ millennial. This is why we have a choice. This is why they showed me these two bowls on this table and said the difference this time was that humanity would have a choice. That's what they told me. Okay, so according to Sharon, and one of her other books called Nordic Aliens and the Star People of the Americas, she states that the Nordics were the ones who taught humanity how to build a new earth: metallurgy, farming, tool making, road building, and masonry. They absolutely hated blood sacrifice and human cannibalism. And there's so much stuff in the Bible that Jesus talks about. No more sacrifices, right? Okay, there's breadcrumbs everywhere, guys. You can take and make a circumstantial case and not have, direct evidence. But when you have enough circumstantial evidence, you can put a thorough picture together, okay? All right. They said that this was two of humans' nasty traits. They terraformed the earth after the great flood. We call it the creation. The Bible refers to them as the sons of God, a faction of fallen angels who got giant children with the daughters of men. So are they talking about what Jason refers to on Archaics as the Anuna? Think about it. The Tuatha of Ireland produced children with the native population, as well as the Mycenaean Greeks did. So this is where you have an overlap with the Greeks and the Irish. This also might be why the Bruce family, that I'm a direct descendant of, that they got the marbles of Greece and took them to Scotland. And this has been a hot button topic for a long time. Greece wants these back. But the one of the Bruce family members, or he might have been a Randolph, they said that, no, we're one family. Okay, so think about that. You can go and read about the Greek marbles and how they ended up in Scotland. Okay. Okay, so this is where you have the overlaps with the Greek and the Irish. And so also remember in that book that we book reviewed a long time ago, and I have been trying to find that book for a while, and it talks about the wisdom in the Bible and the pyramids, and it's written by Connor McDarry, and it's a little thin book too, and it gets lost easy among all my other books. But I got to find that book, because they talk about in that book how the Bible was a book of allegories that were written by the Irish, and that they were stolen from them. Okay, so the ancient gods of Peru also mixed with the native population. And that was one of the other things that I found out in reading all of these other books, was that the South American group that was called the Maya were actually the Nordics. The Nordics were the Maya. The Nordics were the Maya. Okay, so Enoch, Noah's grandfather, described these Nordic beings as he was tasked by the Lord of being the intermediary between the people and these angels or watchers. So let's not forget in the teachings by the Gnostics that they also talk about communicating with the watchers. And this is why they had such ritualistic spiritual purification and cleansing practices with their bodies and their food. And they had really extensive water purification practices. So these Nordic beings were not supposed to reproduce with the humans that were on this density. So you have to remember that when we have planetary ascension or recalibration, harvest, the end of the time cycle, that the vibration of the planet is recalibrated, guys. This is why higher dimensional beings can come into the planet, or lower dimensional beings, okay? So it also potentially can destabilize the frequency of the planet, all right? The planet is a living organism, and we'll get to that as we get to the end, the Gaia hypothesis. This is another thing that I've been studying lately, but you know, we've already been embodying this the whole time. Okay, so let's see. So let's see, let me get back to my notes. So the Nordic beings were not supposed to reproduce with the humans that were on this density. And when we have planetary reset or harvest, that the vibration is reset on the planet, and beings that exist in higher dimensional spaces will often assist with recovery to the existing population. All right, this is the time that we're going into now. The planet's going to be purging itself and recalibrating itself, and we'll have a lot of torrential weather, guys. We're going to have a lot of torrential weather. When the vibration is reset on Earth, the people that can sustain that vibration will remain, and the ones that cannot will not. But the difference between this time and many times before is that, like I said, humanity will have a choice. They will have a choice which timeline they want to step into. And this choice needs to be the embodiment of this choice. This is what we've been talking about with the 13th archetype. So what happened, in my opinion, is that these higher dimensional Nordic beings, or as Jason refers to them as Anuna, when they came out of inner Earth at the celestial North Pole to help humanity that was left on Earth, they ended up reproducing children with the population that was here outside of Earth. Now, it could be, in my opinion, one of two ways. The reason that these beings were giants is because they were from the IGGI. These Anuna and these IGGI people are the same group. They had come from another planet that had been destroyed, and they were suffering the effects of radiation poisoning. Follow me here. They didn't have any women. They were terraforming other planets, trying to find a place that they could go to. They got to the end of their cycle. We've been talking about end of cycles for a long time. This is our wheel right back here. Every planet is on the same recipe, guys. So if they get to the end of their cycle, or they're coming to the end of the cycle, they got to figure out where they're going to go, because they're not going to survive if they don't have the embodiment that's required to have their planet go into a higher octave. They get kicked off like fleas on a dog. Okay, so who's to say that these weren't possibly military groups, guys? We're talking about resets on the planet. We're talking about resets. We're talking about getting rid of the old stuff. We're talking about a constant flip back and forth from antiparticle to particle, a reunification of particle and antiparticle on Earth. So the question is does this happen every 1,000 years, that the time in a bottle turns upside down? I mean, it's something to think about. It's something to think about. So does it get turned upside down? Do our poles get flipped upside down every so often, and Satan gets a little season, and then it's the millennium of Christ on Earth, and that this is the embodiment of Christ on Earth, is all these beautiful old world buildings that were built during the 1400s, right? This is supposed to be the Dark Age, but it was actually the millennia of Christ, that we had all these beautiful architectures that hardly no history exists outside of what we're spoon-fed, right? And then we have a whole entire rewritten narrative of how these buildings came to be, how all these people came to found them, you know, how they turned into insane asylums. And, you know, we all are seeing the writing on the wall, guys. We're all spending a lot of time in astral. We're getting the answers delivered to us. We're waking up and remembering our dream state, guys. Some of us were born awake and aware. Some of us been realm walking our whole lives. Okay, it's abundantly clear at this point that a picture is emerging. All right, so, okay, so these Nordics were disobeying their orders and decided to abandon their post. This is according to Sharon. And getting personally involved with humans, okay? How many times has the empathetic portion of humans stepped up and disobeyed orders, right, and followed their heart? Think about it, guys. Okay? So this is interesting. So I'm coming into it, but you guys, you'll find it interesting too. So we have to circle back to some of these tablets now and compare, because these stories are starting to sound really familiar to these emerald tablets and the IGGI. So it talks about them having to be workers. Maybe they were more like military groups and not actually like here for resources. Okay, so maybe they were military groups that were looking for things. They were looking for places that they could bring. This is why they were all men, right? They brought like a military group on ships. And they came through these dimensional spaces to see if they could find a spot they could go, right? Then you get stuck in timelines and different things and different dimensional spaces. And then you're kind of like stuck there, right? You have to work with what you got. Well, I'm sure that after all these times that they'd been here without any women, right? And then they had this total cataclysm and recalibration of the Earth planet, and then beings were able to come into this space. There were still humans here that were here from before, guys. And we're going to talk about who these humans were, because they'd come from Mars. They'd come from other places. And you guys are going to be shocked when I get to this part, because I thought that most of the people that were embodying dark skin had just came from the Canis Major Sirius system, and also were Lyrans. No, they are also Martians. So this is pretty interesting. And also the Asian populations. And you know, I've talked about the Mother of Earth, that she looks like an Asian or an Inuit or Eskimo, and that she has a childlike body. Well, this is because these forms go back way, 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 way back in time. So let's get on with it. So it says that, so maybe we don't have the true story. So maybe if we think of these people as slave masters, right, that we'll already have slanted ideas. But we need to wipe all that away and just start looking at what is here, what we're reading for what it is, instead of putting a opinion on it, of what we've been indoctrinated to believe, right? We got to think outside of the box. This is what being the 13th archetype is all about. Okay, so it says that these beings taught humans, okay, they taught us, according to Sharon, they taught us hygiene. They taught us beautification practices and how to protect ourselves from giants. So we got to stop right there, okay? So think about this. Think about that we have like these primitive living humans on the earth, that they've been here for a long, 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 long time, that they've lived through this catastrophe, and they've basically been reduced back to beating rocks together, right? There's hardly nothing left. So they come out, these IGGI people, or Anuna, I'm possibly thinking that they're all possibly part of the same group. These Nordics, they come out of inner Earth, right, at the celestial North Pole, because you know that when you go through, you go underneath Greenland now, and that's where they started taking me when I was 3.5, is underneath Greenland, through the celestial North Pole. That's how you get to the heavenly realms. It's where Jesus's land of IESSO is right by the North Pole, in between the coast of China and Japan and the United States and Canada. There is an island there. It's called the Island of Jesus, IESSO. There's also the Sea of Jesus, IESSO, which makes a lot more sense now that there would have been the Sea of Solomon around the Grand Canyon, and that there's an underground water connection from that out to the Pacific. Totally makes sense. This is the Sea of Jesus, guys. The Tartarians were these two people in this group that shared this landmass, right? We'll get into that, but really interesting. So if these beings were trying to find other places to go in ancient times, and they had suffered radiation poisoning because they had wars on their planets, right? They didn't learn about ascension. They learned about technology instead. So they were out of balance. These guys were out of balance. They'd suffered radiation poisoning. So what happens when they come to a new system like Earth and they procreate with the primitive beings that they taught them how to make themselves look prettier, right? You know, when you put lipstick on a pig kind of thing. So what were they doing? They were trying to make these primitive beings here look hot, right? Prettying up. You know how you get an average looking boyfriend, for an example, and then the next thing you know, your friend brings him along somewhere, and I'm like, oh, would you take him to a salon for a makeover? Right? Kind of like that. Kind of like that's what I'm thinking, is they taught them how to pretty themselves up so they'd be doable. Well, when they started having kids, the daughters of men started having children with them because of the radiation and because of the morphinogenic field of Earth. They had huge beings. They had huge beings. They had huge beings. So was the massive size of the humans that were here at the time because of this? Because according to one of the other books, that the life on these other planets, these insectoids that have gotten to massive sizes, like these 6-foot spiders that they talk about that are on Mars, and these huge grasshopper beings and different things like that, it's because of radiation that they grew to enormous sizes. So this is interesting, and this is the Tyobian prophecies, and we're going to talk about that too. So how to protect ourselves from giants. So that's interesting that we needed to protect ourselves from giants at this time. So were giants already caught in an inversion timeline? I mean, it makes you wonder. Or were they born crazy? Or not quite altogether because of radiation poisoning from other systems? Think about it. Okay? So when you start looking at these planetary histories throughout different books, there will be life forms on these planets of astronomical proportions that survived excessive amounts of radiation. And so this Tyobian prophecy book that I'm reading, it explains that these insect species became massive size due to radiation, describing one planet as having 6.5 foot tall cockroaches. Talk about a nightmare. Talk about a nightmare. I think I've been there because I absolutely cannot stand cockroaches. I have no problem with any other insect, any other creature. I cannot handle cockroaches. I'm just like, that's awful. That's awful. Okay, so onward. Enoch talks about these white-skinned beings coming down to Earth in spaceships. Countless soldiers called Grigori that were human in appearance. Their size were greater than even the giants, and their face as transparent as crystal. Noah is described as being born different than all the others, that he was born whiter than snow and redder than the bloom of a rose, and that he had whiter hair than wool and was basically born talking. He had a countenance not like his own father, but those of the gods. So back to Sharon in her book, Nordic Aliens and the Fairies of Ireland, she talks about this connection between the Greek, Scandinavian, and the Irish people. And that one of their technologies was what we call the stone throne of destiny. And that this stone basically would select the next king. It always chose a king of either the Scottish race or the Scythian race. And this is really interesting because they were talking about this famous Druid from Ireland that had this technology that was a flying arrow, and he was descended from the Greek god Hercules. The Greek god Hercules had a son named Skythes, S-K-Y-T-H-E. Hercules and E-C-H-I-D-N-A. It's almost like, I mean, the end of it is DNA, right? Echidna, known as, they had a son named Skythes, or sometimes is cited that this is where the Scythians come from. And so he had a huge kingdom over Russia and an enormous kingdom. So this kind of sounds like Tartaria, guys. So were the Scythians descendants from the island of Iso? Think about it. If they were from northern Russia and they were Scythians, and it was important that the stone automatically chose the king, that they had to come from the descendant of Hercules, or they had to be of the Scottish race, because we talked about what Sharon had talked about earlier in her first book, is that she talked about the Tuatha Dé Danann being the Nordics that interbred here on earth with this people in Ireland, the Greeks, and also being the descendants of Russia. So you're getting a line here that's connecting these different groups, right? So let's go forward. All right. So this throne would choose an Irish king, but it specifically chose a king of Scythian origin. So it was looking for the bloodline of Hercules' son. So the other technology that Sharon talks about is their flying machines. Does that sound familiar, guys? There was this druid known as Mug Ruiz, and he had a flying machine that had several different names, but one thing that it was called was a wheel of light. A UFO? Wheels inside wheels, chariots in the sky, anyone? Right. So on this episode of it's called, the channel's called Astro Irma, but the guy's name is Jake. He talked a while back about Venus, and you know, I talk about Venus a lot on this channel because one of the first templates that was on Earth was anchored to Venus, and this is the true origins of the uninverted Lucifer. Lucifer was bringing the light. Lucifer was the morning star. It's the light before dawn. It's the signal. It's the rooster. It's the wake-up call. Okay? It's the light bringer. Now it has been intertwined with an inversion of the Divine Mother principle. But originally, Venus was encoded into the whole planet. And then later, you had the Hebrews that adopted the star, and that was from Venus, guys. They turned it into the Star of David because we're living in a bunch of falsities right now. We're living in Satan's season, right? So maybe the change on the Statue of Liberty is talking about how the morning light has been chained from us, that we're living in a false reality. I mean, you can look at it many different ways and interpret it many different ways. But originally, our planet was Venus encoded. It meant that this place always had to use the heart space to graduate out of this system. That you can't be looking towards materialism. Materialism. People think that the Antichrist is AI. The Antichrist, my folks, is money. It's money. Jesus talks about it over and over in the Bible. He turned over the tables in the temple, guys. The Antichrist is money. Look what people do for it. Do you see people hurting and raping children because of AI? No, they do it for money and power. That is the Antichrist, guys. We cannot live in materialism. We cannot. It will be the end of us, folks. So we had Jake talking about Venus and the Vietnam War, that our black military actually went through an energy gate or a portal to Venus. And what the soldiers thought was the Vietnam War was actually an attack on the population of Venus. They were encountered by Nordic beings. Okay? There were accounts, witness accounts, and Sharon also talks about this in her book, The Fairies of Ireland, that Vietnam soldiers witness accounts saying they saw UFOs hovering, watching, and paying attention to everything. She talks about how the soldiers were shooting missiles at these UFOs. And that what ended up happening is that these beings, if they wanted to obliterate us, they would have done it a long time ago. They actually turned the missile around and let it come back on to the soldiers that had fired it. So it was giving us a taste of our own medicine, guys. It's like you F-O and F around and find out. So basically, they turned it back around like a boomerang and ended up hitting one of the ships. And our military knew it was our own missile because it has serial number on it. So when she talks about these Nordics first came to Ireland, they were forced to go into battle with the Fomorians. Okay? And they had to protect humans from the giants. So this is a lot of your stories, your hero stories of fighting giants. Of course, there were also the local humans that were involved. We had clan chiefs. So these people were at the time fighting with spears. So these Nordic beings would fight alongside of these humans in the same fashion. Kind of like guerrilla combat, right? Like the Templars taught the Scottish army. And this is why King Robert was able to win that battle. That was because he'd been taught in guerrilla warfare by the Templars. They were skilled in these old fighting techniques. So the Nordics only used mass weapons against the giants. So she speaks about how one of these giants was killed, had possessed weapons of mass destruction as well. So they were possessing these also in India in ancient times. She says that Odin and Thor did something to prevent the negative giants from coming back into Earth. So maybe that this would be Ragnarok. That Odin and Thor are these Nordic beings that are from Venus. And maybe this is why that I've connected to these wolf bloodlines, is because I know that it connects back to Rollo. Rollo, Randolph means wolf shield or shield wolf. Rollo means famous wolf. And my family line goes back to Rollo the Viking. Okay, so they must be guarding the gate like we have, like in the Marvel movies where they're at Asgard. And this is like the permafrost, right? That Thor, no wonder I think Thor's so sexy. So let's talk about this interesting subject called Tuatha Dé Danann, or the land of Jesus. So there's a content creator called Chapter 20 on YouTube, and he does a breakdown on this. So according to his research, he states that the millennial age of Christ already came, We've talked about this before on the channel, how I believe that 800 years of our timeline has been added. And this would be when the Jews were wandering the desert, being in exile, etc., etc. So he's saying that the second coming took place around 70 AD, when the Temple of Jerusalem fell. And then we had the Crusades and all that stuff. So this makes more sense of why we were having these Crusades. My grandfather died in the Crusades. Adam of Kilkendar from Clan Macduff. And these were the kingmakers in Ireland. And they go back to this family. I think they come from the land of Ieso. I do. So this makes whole new sense of the Crusades. Why they were having Crusades. Yeah, they were having Crusades because this was not the Dark Ages, but this was actually Christ's millennial on earth. This is when you had all these beautiful paintings and all these beautiful buildings. This was Tartaria. This was Tartaria. This was the time that Christ was walking earth. And then we went into an in-between phase, which I guess would be the Phoenix events and the Phoenix contracts that Jason talks about. And if you talk about them, he talks about them in events because they're chronological programmed events that happen on the Earth's clock, because we're on a clock. We're on a clock. Everything's programmed. The Earth is a programmed hologram that runs on cycles. And that's how it is. Everything is programmed. Every comet, all of these things, everything. It's a self-containing system. All right. So, the kingdom of earth was during the so-called Dark Ages, which were actually an age of light. So then there was probably a place where Jesus Christ and the saints were concentrated from, and where this worldwide kingdom was ruled. He states that he believes that Mount Zion and the kingdom are located at the North Pole. And that today we live in Satan's little season after the millennial kingdom. But there's another mysterious landmass that may belong to this camp of saints, and it's called the Land of Jesus, or Terra de Ieso, I-E-S-S-O. Are you hearing the linguistics here, guys? Are you have bells going off? Meaning the land of Jesus. In the front of it is the Sea of Jesus. However, it is now missing from modern maps because we are no longer in that same vibrational frequency band, guys. If you're a member of the channel, when I did the video in the past, I think it was called the most important video I've ever made, I showed you the diagram of how Earth is, that it's vibrational bands, that they're like radio stations. And so unless you're tuned in to pick up these other bandwidths, they're not visible. They're not visible in our light spectrum. They're not visible to us. You have to be in the right vibrational space to be able to witness these other realms. But because the earth is on cycles, that there will be a merging of its particle and antiparticle self, which means that these realms are all going to come back into convergence. We'll find Atlantis. We'll find Lemuria. We'll find all of these other realms. All of these suns will start appearing in our sky. All these other moons will start appearing in our sky. That is because we are shifting into a higher vibrational space, guys. So it was removed from maps when we went into Satan's little season because the frequency of the planet dropped. Guys, we separated from our union, just like I separated from Theo. We were one androgynous being, light being, and we decided to do this experiment, and we separated into two. We've had lifetimes here on the earth where we were both incarnated at the same time as a couple, sometimes as a same-sex couple. But it happened because we were having an experience embodying Christ in physicality, embodying God in its infinite possibilities, embodying it in physicalness. This is an avatar suit, guys. It's the Holy Spirit that's inside. That's the animation behind it. Okay. So he states that Mount Zion and the kingdom are located at the North Pole and that we're living in Satan's little season. So this piece of land can be seen on some old maps. It's located at the height of the Bering Strait, exactly between the eastmost point of Asia and the Chukchi Peninsula and the westernmost point of Alaska, the Seward Peninsula. So in Lewis Hennepin's Map of America from 1698 at the top left, you can see Asia and Tartaria and the Americas recognizable by California, a landmass called Terra de Ieso, or meaning the land of Jesus. And in front of the sea is the Sea of Jesus. However, it is missing from modern maps because we're no longer in the same vibrational frequency band. So when the vibration of the planet changes, lands appear and disappear. Now this landmass stretches as far north as the landmass of the North Pole, guys. Talked about the North Pole already. So we're on track when we're talking about now how the first Garden of Eden was actually at the North Pole, like we talked about in our lives before. I said the first Garden of Eden was the North Pole, that we all came out of the North Pole. That was when we were expelled from the Garden of Eden, guys. We had to come out of the North Pole in the higher celestial realms, and we had to come to the lower dimensional realms, okay? As the Mother of Earth told me, that we all came from her. If you're born here, you're an earthling. So you can go to Chapter 20's channel and view the whole series of videos and see for yourself the different maps that show these land masses on them. It's many, many of them that corroborate this evidence. So one other thing that he discovered is in that one of these old maps, you can see a city called Livira. Liveria. Liveria. Sounds like Lemuria, guys. Now it's marked as Pagul, P-A-G-U-L, which Wikipedia has listed as a non-existent phantom city. Even on a 1600 map, there's an illustration of a figure on a cross showing that the Japanese were crucifying criminals. So this leads to a martyrdom of Christians in Japan at the beginning of the 17th century. So this is taking me back to all these letters that my family has that are in the Library of Congress, especially these letters that Thomas Jefferson has that I've been reading. My mind is going a mile a minute now, guys. So he finds another map that shows the same type of illustration exactly on the opening of the Enian Strait, which also on the other maps being in the general vicinity of the land of Jesus, guys. So on another map from I-645, so now you have this whole other meaning of these numerals that are on these buildings that say I. It means ISO. It means Jesus. I-E-S-S-O. It was the time of the Jesus millennial, guys, okay? Or the year 645 in Jesus's millennial kingdom, it shows Terra de Iesos. It says coast not yet known, and then on another map, it's referred to as the land of the company, presumably the Dutch East India Company. And an inscription, Citadel de la Croix, meaning Citadel of the Cross, for the second time, which citadel is just another word for star forts, guys. And on a few other maps, it says that the land of Jesus stretches as far as Asia. It was also called Terra de Laco, or Terra Essionis, E-S-S-O-N-I-S. And in 2022, off the coast of California, they made this incredible underwater discovery where they discovered a yellow brick road, guys. And if you remember the yellow brick road and following the yellow brick road, that's the whole story of the Wizard of Oz. Well, this leads us into what I want to talk about next by this content creator, chapter 20, and that's the Emerald City, New Jerusalem, North Pole, and Zion. So the millennial kingdom is described in the book of Revelations 20. It says, I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and the great chain in his hand, and he laid hold of that dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him to the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should receive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and that after that must be loose a little season. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped to the beast, neither his image, nor had received his mark upon their forehead or their hand. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead not live again until 1,000 years were finished. And this was the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And when 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive. Everyone knows the scripture. It goes on, and we've read it a million times. So whose hypothesis is that he believes that Jesus and the saints have disappeared to the North Pole and are living there in the New Jerusalem, both during the millennial kingdom and right now. And this is a floating island with several temples and buildings above Mount Meru. This is the seat of the government in the millennial kingdom, where the 144,000 saints live. And it can move, so it's not always directly above the North Pole, guys. This is why I say the celestial North Pole. I talk about the celestial North Pole. It's because it's not in one exact same spot. It moves. This is why the celestial North Pole, Ezekiel's vision talks about a holy temple to be established in Jerusalem. And we've talked about Jerusalem being a state of being. This is why Jerusalem has moved around over time. The 144,000 saints lived and can move, so it's not always directly above. So this Ezekiel's vision talks about a holy temple to be established in Jerusalem, which would be the capital of the millennial kingdom. The meeting place of the 12 tribes of Israel during the 1,000-year messianic time in the book of Revelation. The city is also called the heavenly Jerusalem, as well as simply being called Zion. In other books of the Bible, Jerusalem is described by various Christians and writings, for the most part in agreement, as the heavenly city that descends from heaven after the apocalypse. So it's also interpreted by many Christian groups, referring to the church to be the dwelling place of the saints. The New Jerusalem is described in these details. It is made of shining gold, has 12 gates, one for each 12 tribes of Israel, and is decorated with a number of precious stones that are described in detail. Cities like New Smyrna are the earthly version of the heavenly Smyrna, because there's a New Smyrna in Florida. And I've hypothesized that the Garden of Eden, third Garden of Eden, is going to be in Florida. And the reason I say that is because the solar plexus of Gaia is at 80 to 28 degrees, and that's where Bach Tower Garden sits. So the solar plexus is very important to the awakening of the planet. That's the area that joins the heart with the root. Okay. So they talk about this place as being where Christ is ruling from this Satan's little season, and that we have just finished Satan's season, and that we are now going in to another time of heaven on earth, just like we've talked about, that we made our oaths a long time ago and put it in blood, that we give our promise to bring heaven to earth and free all humanity from bondage, and we signed it with our blood. We did that like a couple years ago on the channel, guys. So, you know, you have to wonder, You know, is this why all of us are coming back online? That we're having the Great Awakening? That we've been sleeping through Satan's season? You know, has this been a favor to us by our Heavenly Father and our Divine Mother, Mother Earth? It's time to wake up, right? It's time to put on our work boots and get busy. So, I mean, I just find that really interesting that we've got this theory about the island of Jesus. Okay, so all right, so I want to go through a lot of these notes that I got, but I don't want to make this video so long. So if Earth runs on cycles and it's a living being, and if you look at the old maps of the North Pole where you see the magnetic center and the 4 rivers that run out between the 4 land masses, what if this is where all of the water comes from that causes the flooding on the planet? Think about it. I often make the remark that they pull the plug and release all the water, so maybe it does come out of the north. But people think it's glacial melting. Maybe that's why there are places throughout the world that there's these massive holes that have endless bottoms, because these are actually the drainage ducts for the excessive flood water, like Mel's Hole. So keeping in mind manna that came up in another book that I just finished, because, you know, I was talking about how manna came from heaven a while back, and the Israelis were talking about it. What the other theory is it's describing a gigantic golden cube with the width and height equivalent to 2,225 kilometers or 1,500 miles. So the fascinating connection that they were talking about in this is because this is a connection of mathematics of fractals. So I thought that was really interesting. So the cube, this is a fractal curve. It's a 3-dimensional generalization of the 1-dimensional Cantor set and the 2-dimensional Sierlinski carpet. A Jerusalem cube is a fractal object first described by Eric Bard in 2011, and it's created by recursively drilling Greek cross-shaped holes onto a cube. The construction is similar to the mathematics of the Menger sponge, but with 2 different size cubes. Now, if you remember that ancient church in India that's in the ground, that is like a Menger sponge. And that is exactly what I'm describing here, this particular cube. Okay, so the name comes from the face of the cube resembling a Jerusalem cross pattern. All right, follow me here. The Jerusalem cross worn by the Knights Crusaders has a high level of mathematics embedded into that related to the cube, but technically it's not literally described as a cube, and that's just possibly being that the city is rather inside of a golden sphere. Okay, the Venus star spinning around a ball, Merkaba shaped star spinning around a ball. This is the Venus encoding that's all over the earth. It's about bringing the heart space back into the planet. It's star forts, it's star geometry. The cube with the Jerusalem star creating a Sierlinski carpet or a construction similar to the Menger sponge is a very, very high level mathematic embedment. Okay, that literally it is technically it's not literally described as a cube. It's saying that it can be translated as the city rather inside of a golden sphere, Venus star spinning around a ball, with these dimensions perhaps being a toroidal field, guys. All right, so star for its Venus embedded in our planet later became perverted to Lucifer worship and inversion timelines. We can describe a sphere only as being a shield or a protective layer because it would be impossible for us to explain the measurements inside of one. This is why when we start talking about the prophecy book, that these beings, they live inside of egg-shaped dohos. And the interesting thing is it looks like a shell on the outside, but when they go inside, it has invisible walls because it's a sphere, and it looks to be an infinite amount of space that cannot be measured. All right. Okay, it all has to do with the geometry of the universe. Okay, so all right, so let me get to where okay, so it would be like when we're talking about the term of space. It's impossible to describe space as something you have to fly through. Space is only what we perceive as distance. It doesn't mean physical distance. Chapter 20 theorizes that Mount Zion is the direct center of the map and looks very much like the flat Earth map that has been widely circulated on the internet, which takes me back to the original symbol of the cross actually being a map of the 4 gates on the planet, right? North, south, east, and west. We've talked about this. Your DNA is coded to take you through certain celestial gates. All right, so in the center of Earth is the emerald crystal, and this is the emerald tablet, the emerald heart, the emerald city in the Wizard of Oz. A lot of military programming has to do with the Wizard of Oz stuff, and it's because they take people under Greenland. And if you're coded to get through the celestial North Pole like I am, you get put in these programs at a very early age, just like I was. Okay, so in the center of the earth is the emerald crystal, and it is a heart. And this is why the Melchizedek Cloister Emerald Order is called emerald. It has to do with the core essence crystal of our holographic reality. It's the most guarded secret on earth. All of the cosmology and all of the religions of earth talk about us being covered by a celestial dome, some surrounded by a serpent above, which there are one or more heavenly realms, and below there are more than one underworld. So there's always a high mountain or stone at the center of earth, which either a pillar or the axis mundi or tree of life can be seen in all these other religions. This closed system of earth is just a fraction of our body system and is interconnected, like I've shown, that each of the template is just like every other template. Like we are all made from the same recipe. All of the planets run on the same type system. They all have cycles. We live on cycles. The earth is, some people say the earth is round, some people say the earth is flat, but they're both actually right because it's basically shaped like a donut. And one time, these field colors that surrounded the circular earth like a protective dome shield. And some ancient cultures called this a rainbow serpent. Or it's just plasma, guys. You know, our field has changed over time because we've had a changing of the particle and antiparticle earth. It's separated. It's going to reunify. We're going to have a reunification. It's already started. Even things have changed in the field. Like there's not a lot of stuff going through the news cycle. People are ignoring it. And I'm proud of you guys. I'm proud of you guys for not falling for the tricks. Right? So, a toroidal field of Earth gets activated and our firmament is created like a protective egg, which is blue ice. due to the cooling of lava after volcanic eruptions. And he refers to these same rules. So if a planet is at the end of their cycle and they're not in correct vibrational space to ascend, then their planet will have cataclysms, and many of these other planets are higher vibrational or higher technologically advanced than Earth, so they will seek out other places to inhabit when the end of their cycle is coming to a close. And we've talked about Earth being a number 8, which is an alloy or an amalgamation or a one-size-fits-all. So this is why we get a lot of the throwbacks, right? So this leads me to another thing that we're going to talk about, and then we'll go to a second video. And this is one of the books that I just finished reading, and it's a book called The Hyperborea Prophecy, and it's called The Abduction to the Ninth Planet, or the Golden Planet. And it talks about this French man that's living in Australia named Michel, who was abducted by these other dimensional beings, and these were androgynous beings. The first thing that they did was they took him out on a craft, and they traveled through energy portal spaces. The only way he could describe it is densities, and so they went to their first frequency that was outside of time, which he called it an alternate dimension or an alternate reality. And so I'll interject here that I had a family member that came to me and described this space. She passed away, and she came to me and she told me that she was living in an alternate reality, and that she lived in the exact same spot, and that I could come there, I would be able to feel her, but I wouldn't be able to see her, and that she was remodeling her house in her alternate reality timeline, in her other dimensional space. So this is right outside of time. So the fact that you can leave your physical body here and not have to go through the recycling system is pretty interesting, because there are people in these parallel spaces. There are souls inhabiting all of these other densities, all of these other spaces, guys, okay? So they were going into this first alternate reality. And so this being's name that he is with and being hosted by is called Tao, T-H-A-O. And this is an androgynous being. It said that people will often find themselves trapped there when they accidentally walk through portals or dimensional spaces on Earth. And that they are locked into this particular time phase. So there were people that accidentally, from caveman, prehistoric time, that accidentally walked through portals, and they got stuck and froze in their time. All right? There's people there that were like cavemen. There were people there that were dressed in period clothing. There were all kinds of walks of life of people throughout the eons that were in this dimensional space. So Michelle was told that the population density is very low, and death only occurs by suicide or accident. That time is suspended there, and that men and women, as well as animals, are up to 30,000, 50,000, or even more years old and stuck there in those particular times. So this would lead me to theorize from reading that, oh yeah, and they gave a correlation of the Bermuda Triangle. And this is the same thing that happens, that sometimes that people can come back out. But it's only if you're coded. You're genetically coded to get back out, right? So if you go through this parallel portal at the Bermuda Triangle, some people can come back out, but most people are stuck there. So this could explain missing 411. Again, I've talked about these people in missing 411 having the DNA to be able to just pass through. And this is what happens. They literally get sucked into a time warp. Sometimes entire fleets of ships, airplanes, animals. Remember when that airplane crashed in the Everglades? That was like in the 80s or 90s. There was like a famous baseball player on there that died, and there was one other famous person that was on there. I can't remember. I think it was a musician that was on there. It literally just got sucked into the earth in the Everglades. I could never understand how an entire plane could just get sucked into the earth. Like, where would it go? it would have to get stuck there, right? Couldn't you just dig far enough and find it? But they claim that it went into the Everglades and it just got lost. And I'm like, how can it just get lost? That doesn't make sense to me, unless we're talking about a scenario like this, guys. So these beings lived in habitations that looked like eggs. This Tau person. Their vehicles were also shaped like eggs or spheres. So they had physicality, but they were also liquid crystalline because they were able to pass through objects or use astral projection at will. So one other thing was in the story, when they first left Earth, Michelle talks about how they went north first, that they traversed the Earth because this guy, Michelle, was Australian, okay? So he got a lot of back history on the first peoples of the planet Earth, and they were black and Chinese, and they came from Mars. And they came from a system before that, and then they went to Mars. And we'll get into all of that later, but really interesting. So these were your inhabitants of Mu, who later became the inhabitants of Atlantis, because the Atlanteans were the children of the Mu, of the people from Mu. And these are all of these beings that were coming out. Some of them came out of inner Earth. Others came from other systems because their cycles were up. They had to find other places to inhabit, guys. It was all about their survival. Okay. All right. So the interesting thing is that they traversed across Earth. They went up to the North Pole, and then they went above the celestial North Pole to exit the system. I found that really interesting. Really interesting. It's almost like there is superhighways that are above the celestial North Pole. This is why North Pole is so extremely important. So extremely important. And there was other things that were interesting about this disinfecting process that had to take place with him. You know, it talks about, you know, things falling here from other systems and infecting our planet. Well, in this story, it's kind of like the opposite. He was disinfected umpteen times, like for parasites and things like this. So basically, are we like the bottom of the barrel here and on Earth? We're full of parasites and all of these types of things. They had multiple disinfecting processes that Michelle had to do because our bacteria was harmful. Our body contains bacteria that's harmful to them. Okay? So he had to wear protective headgear sometimes. He was taking medicine. They were using color frequency. They were using like this air mist to disinfect him at different times. He felt like the air conditioning kicked on. Well, these were disinfectant processes where they were like purifying his body, which I thought was really interesting. And they also gave him medication that made his astral body separate from his physical body, because it took time for his physical body, his avatar suit, to get cleaned up from the medicinals that these beings, these Taubians, were giving him. So he had to astrally separate his astral spirit from his physical body. And this is how he was able to do a lot of this traveling, because, you know, they're going multiple light years. They're going through wormholes, and they're going through different systems. So a lot of this is done astrally, guys, not physically. So would this be why in the super space programs that we have all of these clone bodies that they are making, and then that they're separating our consciousness into inhabiting, is because we have too many parasites to use our actual physical bodies to go to these other systems? Just something to think about, right? So maybe this is the reason that we do have multiple body suits in these other programs, these off-world military programs. So they went to this planet called Aremo, Aremo X3, and this is where these 6.5-foot tall cockroaches were. I'm like, ugh. And this was because of radiation. It was because these planets got to the end of their cycle. They blew them up. You know, they got technologically advanced and not spiritually advanced. So everybody gets kicked back to the Earth system. so you can learn not to keep making the same mistakes. Okay, so they also talk about the story of Moses. Now, this is really interesting right here. All right. So he was born into an Egyptian family. Actually, his father was a lieutenant in the Egyptian army. Tayo said that Moses played with Hebrew children and that the Hebrew children were chosen. The Hebrew children were chosen. But that doesn't mean that those are the same people we're talking about today, guys. Okay? The original Hebrews are a completely different group. Okay? All right. They speak of the Egyptian leaders being corrupted, taking drugs, children, let's see, taking drugs, even in ancient times, that fornicating with animals was not a rare event. Yeah. It also said that they took drugs in Greece as well. Now, if you remember the information that we were talking about at the beginning of this channel about the Tuatha Dé Danann, at the beginning of this episode, that author stated that these groups were affiliated with ancient Greece. Well, the one thing that they talked about that I found was interesting is that Moses was a reincarnated being from the planet Xioxtin. And he was about to be reincarnated into Thiauba, Thiaooba. Now, apparently, these are androgynous, very large beings. They embody a more feminine, and they are like what we would call the angelics. The angelics. They came from before time, right? Outside of time. And I guess this might be the group that I come from. I'm not sure. I just know that Theo and I come from, originally we were an androgynous, majestic, huge light being. And that we decided that we were going to come here and help with this ascension process on Earth. And that we separated into two beings. And so Moses was from this planet, and he was about to be reincarnated, because the way that they explain the system is different than the Keylontics, okay? It's also different than the stuff that my grandmother thought. My grandmother thought that there were different dimensions, but she didn't know that there were 9 layers upon 9 layers upon 9 layers upon 9 layers. She always thought that 9 was a number of completion, which she was right about that. But I'm wondering if there's like 81 layers to the oversoul. I'm starting to wonder. And that, because I kept saying the 80 to 82 degree longitudinal line, the 28 is, or maybe it's 82. It's 82. I don't know. Well, anyway, the reason that they picked this person in particular was because that he had 82 lives, I think is what they said. 81 or 82 Earth lives. And that when you get to that certain number of lifetimes on Earth, that you become a certain adept. And so this is why he was selected by these Thiaubian people to go on this journey. So that's interesting, because 28 is the number of the menstrual cycle, right? And 82 degrees longitude and 28 degrees latitude is Lake Wells, Florida, where Bach Tower Gardens sits. There's a meteor there. That's the solar plexus of Earth. Mother Earth. That's her solar plexus. Okay, so Moses was born to an Egyptian family. He played with Hebrew children. The Hebrew children were chosen, and I'll get into that, how they came to be here. So, okay, so one thing that they talked about I found interesting was that Moses was this reincarnated being. He agreed to come to Earth as Moses. They talk about the process of clearing the mind for reincarnation purposes, and this is a scientific process they refer to called electrophonics. Electrophonics. What it says in the book is that, in fact, it occurs often they call it films that the higher self shows to an astral body. Like when you go into astral and you're seeing these films of your life, or when you have an NDE and you're shown these films that show your past and your future, this is actually what this technology is called. It's called electrophonics. It's called electrophonics. So, you know, people in the course of their lives, they'll have like what's called a deja vu moment. Well, this is actually where you're having these two films, that you're having a convergence of your electrophonics, and it's called deja vu. We call it deja vu. All right. So anyway, back to the story. It says that Moses wanted to help the Hebrews, but as he chose to enter the world by the usual means that we all do, choose to come to earth, even though we've made these soul agreements right before we're born, we have to be obliged to forget the course of what our life would be. But in rare cases, such as this, Moses was sent to a good school, and he was very successful in his studies, and he was able to get into the mystery schools, which were teaching Thoth's studies from Atlantis at the time. Okay? And as tensions increased between the Hebrews and the Egyptians, there was a skirmish that broke out, and this part of the stuff is true, that Moses was actually blamed for what happened when he actually had nothing to do with it. He was just an innocent bystander. So he was falsely implicated for killing a soldier. So he basically had to go on the run. So he did go to Midian, Madian, and his report of his marriage to the daughter of the priest of Midian. That's all correct. But they talk about having the same type of scenarios happening over and over again, more than 1 million years earlier. It says that they saved another group of people from the hands of other dangerous priests. It says, you see, history is just a perpetual recommencement, because we're on a clock, guys. We're on a round circle. So it says, first of all, at the time, the Pharaoh at the time was Ramses the second, who was successor to Seti the first. Next, the Hebrews' number was 375,000. And when they arrived at the Sea of Reeds, guys, they arrived at the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea. The Theubians say that their spaceship, numbering 3, opened the waters, which were quite shallow, by means of their force field. We allow the waters to close again, but not a single Egyptian soldier drowned, simply because they never followed the Hebrews into the water. The Pharaoh, in spite of enormous pressure from the priest, did not retract his promise to let the Hebrews leave. The manna, which was distributed every day by the Theubians from their spacecraft, I have to explain to you that manna is not only very nourishing, but also very compactable, which is why they carry it on their spaceships. They were feeding this to the character Michelle in the story. They feed manna to them. It's a type of substance. It's like a nutritional supplement that has a certain shelf life, and it is time released in the body nutritionally. So this is what they were giving the Hebrews. Okay, they were helping them out. Okay, it's basically this nutritional thing, slow releasing food source, but if you leave it manna exposed to the air, it becomes soft and rots within 18 hours. So that's why they told the Hebrews to only take as much as you needed for the day. And for those who took more, soon saw that they made a mistake and should have followed the advice of the Lord God, who was actually them, the Theubians. So The Hebrews did not take 40 years to reach Canaan, but only 3.5 years. So this puts a hole in the story that we've been told about their 40-year story and our time manipulation. This is another corroboration of the Satan season theory, guys. Okay, it only took 3.5 years. So, the story of Mount Sinai is almost true. Remember, we talked about this timetable being fudged, and I believe that all the timelines that the Hebrews or the Jews were in captivity, exiled, and in the desert was all fabricated timeline in order to switch out the ancient Hebrew people with a modern day Hebrew imposter. So it says that this group of beings that's taking him, it says that, wait a minute, let's see. Okay, so they're saying that the Hebrew people were the only people that were walking spiritually in the right direction at that time, is what these Taiubians are telling Michelle. And, okay, so it says, this is a quote, it says, "So it says that in our eyes," which this is the group of beings that's talking to him, it says that these were the people who followed the right direction, that is the direction of spirituality among them, and later among their great priests. There were some that rumored the Messiah was going to come and save them. They should not have told the people that. They are reporting a part of the conversation we had with Moses on Mount Sinai. Since then, the Hebrews have been waiting for their arrival of the Messiah, and yet he has already come. So it says right here that we already had the millennial reign of Christ, guys. It's telling us in this Taiubian prophecy. They established a civilization notable for great royal legislation, such as Solomon and David, to name but two. Then this is a quote from the book. "We observed that these people following Solomon's death were heading towards anarchy and allowing themselves to be influenced by evil priests. Alexander the Great invaded Egypt, but in the end did nothing constructive for the world. The Romans succeeded him, building an immense empire that was oriented more towards materialism than spirituality." So then it talks about the Romans, and then it talks about that they decided to help rather than help Rome in a spiritually sterile land. They did decide to help Israel, thinking that the Hebrews were very intelligent, having ancestors who are spiritually highly advanced. They considered them adequate to propagate universal truth. The Hebrew people were unanimously selected by the great Theori. On earth, they were referred to as the chosen people, and the name could not have been more appropriate. They were indeed chosen. Their plan was to capture public imagination by sending a messenger of peace. The story of the birth of Jesus, as you know, it is with the Virgin Mary as mother, is quite true. The appearance of an angel at the Annunciation is correct in every detail. We sent a spaceship, and one of us appeared before the Virgin, who was indeed a virgin, telling her she was going to become pregnant. The embryo was implanted in her while she was under hypnosis. So apparently these beings say that they have the knowledge that they can revive the dead, revive and cure the sick and the dead, help the blind, make people walk who are paralyzed. They can cure any illness. And so it says that we are masters, not of nature, but in nature. We can do the difficult of all. We can generate life spontaneously. Out of the release of the cosmic ray, we can create any type of living creature, including man. That's what they say. And then Michelle says to them, "You mean you mastered test tube babies?" And then the Theories say that it says that they can recreate a 20 to 30-year-old human in a span of 24 hours. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. So back to the story. They say they implanted an embryo in Mary. She found herself pregnant. So by this happening, they were hoping to attract the attention of people to emphasize the coming of Jesus was really a remarkable event on this birth of his child. So basically, they talk about how Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus, as well as 2 donkeys, was taken in the spaceship and redeposited very close to Egypt because of King Herod. And so maybe King Herod was the Antichrist. Think about it. I don't know. Maybe. They talk about it. They say that Nero was. So I'm going to tell you the part of the Jesus story that we've not heard about before. All right, so let me read all this. I pretty much copied this verbatim. Okay, Jesus, born in Bethlehem, proved by the miracles pertaining to his birth that he was quite special and that he was in fact a Messiah. So we'd captured the imagination of the people when a baby was born. Its astral body cannot know all in regards to its previous knowledge. This was the case of Moses too. So the whole point of Jesus was a messenger who would be able to persuade humanity that there was life beyond this life. The reincarnation of the astral body had stopped. Accepting this belief as the civilizations had become more and more degraded after Atlantis fell. So they say that Jesus' physical body was here was inhabited by a highly evolved astral body, and no matter how much advanced schools that he would have went to, he would have never acquired the knowledge to revive the dead or cure the sick. So the story that they talk about the missing years of Jesus is, or where it says that he left his parents at the age of 14. Well, he actually left his parents at the age of 14, accompanied by his 12-year-old brother, Okiri. He traveled to Burma, India. Now, Burma, India was one of the first civilizations on the planet. And this is where the Chinese people went. The black people, the black race, they went to Australia. And they were determined to restart. They were called the Bacratinians. This group together were determined to repopulate their civilization because they were almost completely decimated. They went from their planet to Mars. They'd ended up on Earth, and it was a small group of what is today the modern, what we call Aborigines of Africa, and the Chinese Asian descendants of what we call Asians. Okay. He traveled to Burma, India, China, and Japan. His brother accompanied Jesus everywhere until Okiri was accidentally killed in China. Jesus took a lock of his hair with him, for he loved his brother very much. It says that he was 50 years old when he arrived in Japan, where he married and had 3 daughters. He died in the Japanese village of Shingo, where he lived for 45 years. He is buried in Shingo, which is on the main island of Japan, Honshu. And besides, his tomb is another containing a little box holding his brother's lock of hair. So it says that you can go to Shingu, formerly known as Herai, in the district of Amori. So it's said that Christ that died on the cross in Jerusalem was called a Arioc. He was brought by us to the desert of Judea, having volunteered to change his physical body. Thus he abandoned his hermaphrodite body, which had lived some considerable time on Thiuba, and took on the body of Christ created for him by our Theori. They call the Holy Spirit Theori, T-H-A-O-R-I. Doing so, he maintained totally the knowledge he possessed on Thiuba. So it says that he previewed his life, and that religions And that it also said that religions and sects were a curse on the earth. The Vatican is certainly the wealthiest church on the planet, and yet the priests have made vows of poverty. They have no fear of being damned because they say it is the church which is rich, not them. This is just really a plan since they make up the church. It is like the son of a multi-billionaire claiming that he's not rich, only his father is. The church has not distorted the passage in the Bible relating to, well, they've used to their advantage. Well, there isn't it's preferable that the rich grow poor at the profit of the church. The young generations on earth, or the process of self-examination, they've come to a turning point that's led them to this point. I know they feel alone more than any other generation before them. It isn't by joining religious groups that they're going to be free of their solitude. So basically they're saying that you need to embody this 13th archetype and look inside yourself for answers. Do not wait for help to come from elsewhere or you'll be disappointed. So, I mean, this is just a saying that goes over and over. God says, God helps those who help themselves, right? So, you know, they had this apparatus called a lithiolac that was this device that they were riding on that took away the gravitational force. And so they talked about this being the apparatus that they were using in ancient times to help construct these pyramids, move massive amounts of weight, and do all kind of things. And so the last thing that I want to talk about with Jesus, and then I'm going to end this video because it's been an hour and a half, is that these beings have his body in a sleeping stasis state in this area on their planet. This, like this dojo, there were 147 beings, or dokos, that were inside this doko, that were either sitting in a lotus position or suspended in the air, lying flat on their back with their arms by their side. And they are dead and in a state of stasis. And one of them was the body of Christ. And it's in a preservation levitation state. And these Theori beings are the only ones that can do this. They're from the highest dimensional realm, the ninth. And the way I explain how the solar system works is overall, it's like we talked about versions of itself underneath it. So Earth is the bottom of the rung. So they have the body of Christ, and they have these other beings that come from these various other planets where each had this really important role to play. And so he said that some of these bodies resemble North American Red Indians. He saw others that looked like black Africans, but they weren't. Nor was it the body of a Japanese. It was, you know, it just looked like some of these beings that had come on these ships and came to Earth. There was a group of Chinese that were looking for a new home base. And so they actually come to Earth about 500 years apart from the African people. And so they decided that they were going to work together to survive. So they had had this accident, and a very small number of people ended up making it to Earth. So these were the first colonies that were in Australia and India. So when you have African people that say that they were the first people here, they're not wrong. They were here with the Chinese people at the very beginning. They came from their planet Bakratini. Their planet Bakratini had been destroyed, and they were trying to find another inhabitable planet. They had got to the end of their cycle, and they were not spiritually advanced enough. So their planet got reset. So they had to find another planet. So there were two different groups that headed out, and some of them went to Mars, and some of them went to other places. So this is why you have all these different mixed groups. And, you know, we call them races, but they're just different shades of skin. They're staggered all over the solar system, is because all of these people went from place to place to place to place to place. It's literally impossible at this point to determine who's from where and who's here. They're everywhere now. All of these groups are everywhere. And you have some that are inhabiting polarity, and you have some that are inhabiting illumination. And these two opposite sides are going to converge together, because we're having a reunification of particle and antiparticle Earth right now. And we've already started. So, all right, so it says, so they had an accident, they got stuck here. They were the first colonies in Australia and India. So these two groups blend together. Do they equal the Polynesians? You know, the Polynesians do have black features and they have Asian features. But if if you separate them apart, you could have, you could have Tiger Woods, essentially. You know what I mean? You could have that look, because that's what you kind of get. So you have to remember that these are just all a blending of genetics, guys. So on page 118 of this book, they talk about Atlantis and Mu. So I'm going to read that part in the book. It says Atlantis, like the continent of Mu, did exist and was situated in the northern hemisphere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was attached to Europe and linked to America by the isthmus and to Africa by another isthmus at the latitude of the Canary Islands. Its area was slightly greater than that of Australia. It was slightly greater than that of Australia and was inhabited by the people of Mu approximately 30,000 years ago. In fact, Atlantis was a colony of Mu. There was also a white race. Now listen to this. There was also a white race there. Tall, blonde people with blue eyes. It was the Mayas. Did you hear that, guys? This is revolutionary information here. So it says that the Mayan people were blonde-haired, blue-eyed beings. So these are your Nordics. The Mayans were the Nordics. Okay. So this could explain why you had the German people going down to Argentina, because there were already codes down there that they were all carrying from these earlier time cycles on Earth, guys. Ends of cycles on other planets. DNA material coming here because they didn't have a place to go. They were having to survive. All right. Okay. Very learned colonizers from Mu. So they're saying that the Mayas, the tall blonde people with blue eyes, were very learned colonizers from Mu who gathered the country. They constructed there a replica of the pyramid of Savanasa, Savanasa, 17,000 years ago. They explored the Mediterranean thoroughly via the north of Africa. French Berbers, anybody? Right? Moors? Right. These are your Moorish people, right? These Mayan people, they were together with these Bacratini people, guys. This is where we get all these different groups from. They just all got together. All right. So, where they acquainted the Arabs, which are descendants of the crossbreeding between the Chinese and black Bacratinians, Bakaratinians. These were black and Asian people from Mars, with much new knowledge material as well as spiritual. Okay. So it's saying that these blonde-haired, blue-eyed Nordic people taught these Arab people of stuff from these ancient mystery schools. This is how these Arab people learned this stuff, was from these Mayans. All right. The numerical script, for example, still used by the Arabs, came from Atlantis and from Mu, of course. They went to Greece, where they founded a small colony, and the Greek alphabet corresponds almost exactly to that of Mu. Finally, they arrive in a land that the natives called Aranka, Aranka, which you know is Egypt. They're establishing a strong colony with a great man known as Thoth at its head. Laws were established which embodied the belief of Mu and the organization principles of Atlantis. Improved plants, new technology for raising cattle, new methods of cultivation, pottery, and weaving. We are all introduced to Thoth, as Thoth was a great man of Atlantis, extremely knowledgeable, material as well as spiritually. He found villages, built temples, and just before his death, he constructed what we now call the Great Pyramid. Each time these great colonizers judged that the new colony had potential to become great materially and spiritually, they would construct a special pyramid as a tool you were able to see for yourselves on Mu. In Egypt, they constructed the Great Pyramid on the same model as the Pyramid of Savasana, but on a scale 3 times reduced. These pyramids are unique, and in order to fulfill the role as a tool of their dimensions, the specifications must precisely adhere to as well as their orientation. It took 9 years for Thoth and his master architects, for they knew the secret of anti-gravitation from Mu and the secrets for cutting the rock and using, let's call them, electro-ultrasounds, but on Earth the experts believed it to have been constructed by the pharaoh Cheops. But this is not so. Of course, this is not the only mistake that the experts on Earth have made. On the other hand, I can confirm that the pharaoh Cheops used this pyramid as well as it was meant to be used. So it says that the Maya Atlanteans were not the only ones to explore and colonize. Gone for thousands of years, the Nagas had colonized Burma, India, and finally they reached the shores of Egypt, about the latitude of the Tropic of Cancer. They too founded a successful colony and occupied Upper Egypt. Remember how northern, upper, and lower Egypt are so drastically different? This is why. These were 2 different civilizations. You had the Naga Empire that was in the north. And then you had the Maya/Atlantean. These are an amalgamation group of people, right? These are the Anunnaki. These are the children of the Mu. These people were in Lower Egypt, okay? All right. So both groups of colonizers introduced similar sorts of improvements. The Nagas established a large town called Mayo, M-A-Y-O-U, on the banks of the Red Sea. The natives of the region went to their schools, gradually becoming assimilated with the colonists and producing the Egyptian race. However, about 5,000 years ago, the Nagas in the north of Egypt and the Maya Atlanteans began fighting for a reason that is quite silly. The Atlanteans had a religious difference over reincarnation. So this is what they were all fighting about. They believed in reincarnation. They believed that the soul or the astral body traveled westward to the origin of its ancestors. But this other group believed that it went eastwards because they were serpent, right? They were the Nagas. They used the east gate. And so, you know, we had the north, south, and the east and the west. So we had the group of differences as they were disputing over which celestial gate they were going to use, right? I guess neither of them could go through the north. They weren't coded for the primordial North Pole gate. So this was what the problem was. They were fighting over this silly little difference. But it was not a terribly cruel war, as both groups compromised compromised, fundamentally were compromised of fundamentally peace-loving people, and eventually they became allied and formed a unified Egypt. In the first king of unified Egypt, both upper and lower, was called the Mena, M-E-N-A, King Mena. He was who established the town of Memphis. He was elected by the same method used in Mu, a method that did not survive in Egypt due to the rise of a powerful clergy. So it just goes to show you that religion has been the thing that has been the destruction of all of the spiritual growth on the planet. And isn't that just and isn't that just an inversion when we've been taught to think that church is a refuge? But church is here, guys. Church is here. So this is Mena, the king of Mena. All right, so little by little, the pharaoh was put under the thumb of the powerful clergy. The situation continued over the years, with notable exceptions, except the pharaohs. Among the pharaohs who yielded to the clergy, one such exception was Akhenaten. And we've talked about Akhenaten before, and I said that this whole dynasty was about bringing back codes, and that basically they were infiltrated from the outside. That Nefertiti and Kia, they were sister wives, but they were also soulmates, and they were here to bring back a bunch of codes. And that one of the other sister wives that they had his father was the one that brought in the problems. This is when this whole system got infiltrated again. And we right back to the thing. So Akhenaten was poisoned by the priest. Just before dying, he made the following statement: "The time that I have spent on this earth was an era in which the simplicity of truth was not understood and was rejected by many." So this is what often happens with these religious sects. The Egyptian priest distorted the truth. Simple, though it was better to have a hold over the people. And so he had them believing in the devil and various divine beings, as well as other such nonsense. And so it says here, it also must be said that prior to the war and the subsequent peace pact, which saw Mena installed as the king of Egypt, the population made up of the Maya, the Atlanteans, and the Nagas, equal proportions, had established a sophisticated civilization in both lower and upper Egypt. So the country was prosperous, farming, grazing, flourishing at the time of the first king of Egypt. Mena was almost the consecration of the rising civilization. Earth is visited, as are many other uninhabitable planets scattered throughout the universe. Sometimes the inhabitants of certain planets are obliged to evacuate as their planet is dying. Now, as explained, you can't change planets as you might change houses. You must conform to a cycle that is well established. Otherwise, catastrophes can be the consequence. So even this being is confirming this information we've already talked about extensively on the channel. This is what happened 12,000 years ago. Remember? 12,000 years ago, right here, the Younger Dryas time. Human beings left the planet Hebra, H-E-B-R-A. Their cycle had ended on their planet, Hebra. They had to find another place to go, guys. So what did they do? They came here, and it caused a cataclysm on our planet. This is when these Nordic beings came here. These Maya beings, they came from Venus. If we're putting all this information together that these other authors have put together, and this information that we're bringing forth today from these other books, these would have been Venusians. So they had 12,000 years ago a catastrophe on their planet in their cycle. Maybe this is why Venus is not inhabitable on the surface now. Something to think about. All right. Alrighty, so they It says their planet will become total, let's see, human beings left the planet Hebra in order to visit the galaxy in search of a new planet of the same category of their own. For they knew in the millennium to come, their planet would be totally uninhabitable. A spacecraft capable of extremely high-speed experience. Serious problems during its reconnaissance flight happened, and it was obliged to land on Earth. It landed in the region of Krasnodar, in a town in western Russia. Okay? Needless to say, at the time, there was no town, no people, no Russia. On board the spacecraft were 8 astronauts, 3 women, 5 men. These people are approximately 170 centimeters in height, with black hair, fair skin, and some had long brown hair. They made a successful landing and began preparing to repair their vessel. They found the gravitational force stronger than on their own planet, and initially they had some difficulty moving about. They established a camp near the spacecraft, expecting repairs to take a little time. One day during work, an accident had occurred, causing a terrific explosion that destroyed half of the vessel and killed 5 of the cosmonauts. So now they're only left with 3. 1 man, 2 women, guys. 1 man, 2 women. Kind of like the story of Lot and his daughters allegory. Maybe they weren't daughters, right? Okay. The other 3, being some distance away, were unharmed. They were Robanan, a man, Robanan, Robanan, a man, and Livia and Dinah, 2 women, or Dina, Livia and Dina. They knew what was in store for them, coming from a planet of a superior category. They did not belong to Earth, where they were in fact prisoners now, and thus they anticipated the misadventures that found them. The accident came as no surprise. For several months, the 3 remained in the same spot, for the season was warm and they had some weapons, and they were able to secure game and provisions of manna. And then Roaston, having been lost in the explosion, eventually the cold arrived. They decided to move further south. The gravitational force made walking long distance really hard for them. So they struck out to warm climates, and it became a bearable road to Calvary. They passed by the Black Sea, heading in the direction of today's Israel. The journey took months, but they were young, and astonishingly, they made it. The weather became more clement and even hot as they reached lower altitude. They stopped by a river, establishing there a more permanent camp. All the more permanent, Dinah was several months pregnant. At full term, she gave birth to a son who they named Rainan. And then Livia was also pregnant, and she bore a son named Rabion. These people from Hebra acclimatized on the spot, which was rich in game and honey and edible plants, and there they founded their line. It was quite some time later that they made the acquaintance of some nomads passing by. This was their first contact with Earthlings. The nomads found the women to their liking, and they wanted to kill Robian and take his women, right? But so these people had to start learning to fight for themselves if they were going to survive. So basically they kind of got dropped into purgatory. So these people were greatly sad that they had to resort to these measures, but they saw another sign that they were on a planet that was forbidden to them by universal law. So maybe this is why a planet has to advance, and the frequency has to advance, because other beings cannot inhabit a space if they're higher advanced, that's lower advanced. I mean, you can't go forwards or backwards in a vibrational frequency spectrum on planets. You expose yourself to worse conditions. So this is their line that became the ancestor of the Hebrews. And, you know, now today they call themselves the tribe of Judea. But we can't really say that we've got true Hebrews that are in Israel, right? We really can't say that, because that's not true. I would think it would be more, it would be more correct to say that these were actually the beings that ended up in Ireland, Scotland, and Greece, than to say that they are our current day Israelis. So I don't know. So I'm going to stop there. I got a lot more information to go over, and I hope that you remember that you can turn the wheel up to go twice as fast. I'm only half done with all of this information. Some really interesting stuff. I'm sorry if you got bored, but there's so much stuff to go through here. So I've got another hour and a half's worth of material, and I'll either come back today if I have time. I've got to go out and work in the greenhouse and get the other side all dug out again. And if not, try to do a live this week. I really want to get in touch with you guys and see how all y'all are doing, and how you've made it through the Lunar New Year, how you're doing with all these planetary alignments. I know everybody's exhausted. I'm exhausted too. I'm just waking up tired. So tired. A lot of stuff going on in the other realms, guys, but we're doing a lot of good work. So with that, when you come and find me, I'll be here, because we're living in the past, present, and the future, all at the same time. So I hope that you could stay with me and tough it out. And we're going to finish going over this prophecy, the Tuatha prophecy. We're going to go over the Satan's little season material. We're going to talk more about the island of Jesus that's by the North Pole, the importance of Greenland. And we'll talk more about some of these books that talk about these Nordic beings, and from Lars Bergen and Sharon Delarose's material. So with that, thanks for spending 2 hours with me this morning. Don't forget to get outside today. Give thanks to our Heavenly Father and our primordial mother, Mother Earth. Thanks for watching Sacred Enzyme, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.